Thank you. I thought I was talking to myself. Thank you.
So by so saying, are you calling on, businessmen to engage in politics?
Thank you. So that the real source of my frustration as a Pan-African today is to say, what is our generation doing? How are we contributing to the welfare of the continent? Now, you can take the Nelson Mandelas of this world, the Nyereres, even the Mugabes in their own way. They have actually done a tremendous job in fighting an issue, a cause, with great success. Then it was colonialism. Our generation, which is well-educated, well-exposed, we actually run big companies. When I was in Nigeria, I was looking after a $2 billion business. We have got the experience and the training to be able to get into government and work and help some of these governments to work. Unfortunately, your guys who are actually well-merited do not want to be found in politics in Africa. The only problem is your company, that very viable company you're so proud of, the guy who is going to be legislating around that company is your security guard, who has got no idea what you're talking about, but he's in parliament. And he's your minister if you're not careful. So, and this is the reality of the continent now.
Let me come back to Dr. Gayle. Dr. Gayle, the general narrative is that youth can only find success in business or entrepreneurships. What's your message to civic leaders or youth engaged in public management?
Yeah, and I'll just kind of take off from where you left off. I do think that professionalizing government is important. I think that may be a distinction between all business people going into government, because I do think that there is clearly a value in having, the three sectors, if you will, having the private sector, having the public sector, and having the social sector and civil society. And I think the three work together in tandem. And so, I think as you very well articulated, having a much more professional approach to government, and that includes having more business-like techniques and having people who are actually qualified for their jobs. So having a finance minister who knows something about finance, a health minister who knows something about health, et cetera. But it also means that there are two other sectors in which people can, besides private sector and entrepreneurship. And you're right, there's a lot of focus on developing businesses, and everybody can go out and start their business. And by the way, that's the same thing here in this country. We have, this same kind of millennial generation. Everybody is going to start their own business or their own NGO. And I think there's a lot to be said for entrepreneurship, but there's also a lot to be said for the social sector. And having people who say, I want to be part of civil society and part of the voice that keeps our governments accountable, and is able to focus more on how are we making sure that the community needs and social needs are being met. So I just think it's a dance between all three. So people talk about the golden triangle or the triple bottom line, or there are lots of ways of thinking about how do these sectors come together in ways that create value, economic value and social value, but everybody appreciating their different roles. So I encourage young people to think beyond only business entrepreneurship, but thinking about how can you be a social entrepreneur or a public sector entrepreneur. It's the mindset of entrepreneurship that I think can go into any of the sectors that make a difference in building a stable and economically viable society.
Thank you. So Mr. Moyo, we all know that it is not easy to be a businessman and a successful businessman in Africa with those issues of corruption and bribery and everything. How did you succeed in going through all this and reaching the stage you are today?
I think one of the highlight of my career, obviously, is a lot of people ask me, I've worked in 7 countries, which one is your favorite? It was actually Nigeria. I enjoyed so much. If my ogas are here, I'm also one of the ogas there. But I love the pepper soup. I love everything about the country. I love their also 1015, the big one. Yeah. But when I moved from Zambia to Nigeria, one of the questions was, how are you going to survive in Nigeria? Firstly, I was very young. I was in an executive team. I was 31 or so. I think the youngest, next youngest was 46. So that was also the first issue I had to deal with. But secondly, I was running a $100 million budget because it was a marketing budget that I was running. I was chief marketing officer there. And when you run a $100 million budget, you have got lots of friends that come your way. And and they came in great style. Some came bringing in friends, bringing in relatives, and they wanted to play golf with me. But there was a lot going on. But I think in the first chapter of my book, I talk about values. Leadership in Africa, if you want to be a successful leader, you need to be very clear as an individual what are your values. And those values, thank you, those values need to be well articulated. So I've got 5 values. Everyone who has ever worked for me in Africa, and there's a lot, they know if you bump into them, they'll tell you my 5 values. Legacy. I like you to visit my funeral one day. I want to hear what you say at the funeral. Integrity is my second value. I like to sleep well at night. I don't like to lose sleep over what did I sign, was there anything hanky-panky that went with it. That value is a non-negotiable. Everyone who has ever worked for me understands that. Lifelong learning, work, and profit. But the second value in particular is sacrosanct. No lines are supposed to be crossed. So what happened is, when I told my immediate staff, they told their friends and they told their suppliers. I think one guy walked into my office 6 months and says, "Oh, we heard about you, Oga. You don't chopo," meaning you don't chopo. So these days we don't pay anyone anything because the big Oga doesn't chop. And that's how these things work. Now, if I can be trusted with a smaller budget of $100 million, certainly if you give me $1 billion, I'll probably behave the same way. So I think understanding that value system is key, and also communicating it. But you see, the fish always rots from the top. In Africa, we have seen the fish rotting from the top, and then when you look at the entire body, it's contaminated. And that's what's happening across the continent in a number of countries. And that's why we need to almost weed out this whole, it's almost a cancer eating the system. But it starts with the leadership. And that's why for me, leadership is a non-negotiable. And getting the right people is something that everyone in this room, and in the last chapter of the book, I've created a platform on how everyone in this room is going to contribute to their own country's transition from where we are today to the future that our children will be happy with. But the way things are going right now, we might all be exporting our children everywhere, and they might also be chased if they come to certain places. So it's important we fix our own homeland. So that's how we want to address the issue of corruption in Africa, is simply putting in the right people. I'm not saying corporate people and your natural leaders don't steal. There was a certain analogy. You know, they normally take 10%, they leave 90% in the country. Unfortunately, some of our politicians today take 90% and leave 10%. You can't go very far in that route. So it's probably, you can never eliminate it, but you can certainly get to a certain level of efficiencies that are good for the nation from where we are today.